And probably the first thing just to be aware of that a lot of people are not quite so aware of really is the concept of shared responsibility. And when we're talking cloud computing, this really comes into play. I have conversations with customers who have said, oh, well, my email's in Microsoft 365, got to be secure. It's Microsoft secure. Yeah, I've enrolled my laptop in Intune. That must be secure. Yes and no. So this is where shared responsibility comes in. As a cloud provider, Microsoft absolutely have a key part to play, and they have to operate to certain standards. And I'm going to get onto some of those in just a moment. But there is also the other side of the fence, which is your responsibility as the end customer. So this is where Microsoft will make tools available to you to help you be secure and compliant. But it's up to you to actually make use of the ones that are appropriate to your organization. Now, the modeling on that changes as we use different types of infrastructure models. So, for example, here on this chart, we look at SaaS, software as a service, Microsoft 365, great example, or many other cloud platforms. You as the customer are responsible for your information and data that you put into that platform. For example, the Microsoft 365 scenario, you'll be responsible for your devices, your mobile devices, your laptops, and so on. You're responsible for your user accounts and managing those and setting those up. And that is using the tools Microsoft give you to enable you to do that. But then moving on to the things like the application itself. So, for example, Exchange Online, the email part of 365, the network, the data center that all runs from, you don't have to look after that. That's Microsoft's problem. And that's for them to manage and make sure it's compliant. So that's why you pay them a subscription for that software as a service and that model, much as you would for any other cloud provider. So Sage Cloud or any of these other, many other sort of providers. Again, you pay them for the use of the service and they are providing the infrastructure it runs on. They manage that. As we move through, though, we move to platform as a service or PaaS. So actually, again, the top level stays the same as you see it. Actually, there's an element here that you're always responsible for. But as we move into PaaS, you start taking on more responsibility for some of the controls, so some of the network configuration and the applications and how they run in the cloud. When we move along further to infrastructure as a service or IaaS, you are, again, Microsoft make the tools available to you. They will run the data center to make sure that it's secure and compliant. But it's up to you to configure how the virtual machines work, what operating systems are running in there, what versions, the patching of those operating systems, the network security, such as Azure Firewall. And all of that becomes your area of responsibility. And obviously, we come right across to more the on-premise than, if you like, the more traditional IT we've come from. Of course, you look after all of it because you'll provision a server room. You'll have to look after the air conditioning in there, the access controls, and everything. So you can see on this modelling that through shared responsibility, there's different things we're responsible for. This is, of course, something you can do yourself, but of course, it's typically where someone like ourselves will come in because we understand the different areas of responsibility and what needs to be set up. And as I'll come to later on, there is various best practices that can be used so that when we're talking about setting up things like Azure SQL, if we were to use that service, for example, we know how to set up that service. We also know how to set up the network controls around it. If we're setting up an IaaS environment, we understand how to set up VMs to run securely. We can make sure they're patched. We can make sure that there's appropriate network security around that environment. And even with the SaaS products as well, there's that question of how do I manage my devices through Microsoft 365? Again, we have to understand all the controls. It's part of what our Microsoft accreditations I mentioned earlier, that we understand all that and understand the best practice. And we keep up to date, of course, with Microsoft. So that shared responsibility is absolutely key to understanding how you can actually leverage cloud computing and what you need to do and what Microsoft will do. So just to focus then just a little more on the what do Microsoft do question. So Microsoft at a global level, and they've got data centers globally in all regions around the world. They adhere to various compliance standards. Some are more of a global, such as the ISOs we can see here. Some are more industry specific, and some will be more regional, such as Cyber Essentials there in the UK. But this is what Microsoft adhere to on their data center services. So this isn't whether your users have got multi-factor authentication or whether your laptop is managed through Intune. This is what Microsoft are doing for their data centers. So when you make use of those services, you have reassurance that they are meeting these standards. And these can, on the website, you can actually drill into this a lot more and go into each of these to find out more about what Microsoft actually do there. Microsoft also publish reports. They're very open about all this sort of thing. So they publish all the different audit reports they've gone through for their data center services on their website. So as you can see in this example here, I'm showing how some of the reports for PCI DSS. And again, you can go in, you can open these and view them. So Microsoft are very open about all this sort of thing. So to bring that all together, if you want to look at what do Microsoft do, and that's key because you should understand that, as you should with any cloud provider. Microsoft have a website called the Trust Center. All that resources that I've just showed you came from there, and there's a lot more besides. So it's a really good resource if you want to keep a handle on what Microsoft are doing from their side of the fence, if you like, and all the different reports there. So if you are going through compliance audits, you can say, yes, we've done some due diligence on our cloud provider. And in this example, it's Microsoft. And here's all the reports and all the things they adhere to. So the Trust Center does have that centralized resources around all those regional and global standards that I showed you the screenshot from there. You can drill into that and get much more information on each of those. And they focus the whole website and the whole principle around the trust pillars of privacy, security, compliance, and transparency. As a footnote as well, if you did want to just find out any more about some of the Microsoft standpoint on privacy, and this is something they're very big on over particularly the last few years, it's grown and grown. Microsoft's president and chief legal officer, a guy called Brad Smith, he's an amazing speaker and he speaks a lot at various different conferences, Microsoft and others. There's lots of YouTube videos for him, so do recommend if you look on the Microsoft YouTube channel, there's some great talks on there from Brad Smith and Satya Nadella, the CEO, and it talks about how they approach privacy in general and their standpoint on all of that. So that's always worth a watch if you fancy grabbing a coffee and spending a few minutes just having a look and hearing it, if you like, straight from the horse's mouth. So I've spoken a lot so far about what do Microsoft do, but I said as well, of course, under that shared responsibility, you have a responsibility. So it's Microsoft provide the tooling. It's up to you to utilize those, and then that helps drive your security posture and your compliance. So across Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365, there are various tools available. I'm going to touch into a few as we work through. There's various tools available that can help you actually achieve and support your compliance activities. So the first big thing that is available across the whole of the Microsoft Cloud Stack, there's various different pieces of these across Azure and 365. There's various tools and templates that Microsoft offer. And these map to industry compliance standards. So if you said, right, I need my 365 and my Azure to be compliant with PCI DSS, you can actually run reports in those platforms against PCI DSS, and it will actually show you and give you recommendations of any gaps you've got and how you can bridge those gaps to then be compliant with those cloud platforms. Now, aside of that, and if you like wrapping around that in a wider umbrella, are the Microsoft best practices. These are the core things that we operate to when we're deploying environments. Things like the Microsoft Well-Architected Framework in Azure, for example. So this is where Microsoft say, if you're setting up one of our cloud environments, here's how it should be done to best practice. So there's various reports and frameworks that we can use that actually, if that's followed, will help give you a good baseline of security and compliance. So the Microsoft best practices are a great complement and wraparound to some of the more industry specific tooling that's available. But again, I know I keep saying it, but again, this is all available to you. It's up to you, and or say you, or working with someone like us, to then implement what is applicable for your business. And some people might say, well, why wouldn't we just switch all that on automatically? Well, there's a lot available to start with. There's a lot of different compliance standards that we can map to. They're not applicable to all organizations, of course, and all industries. But different organizations have different risk points. And it's about looking at those and looking at also those business objectives, how you want to operate. And then you can utilize the tools to best suit that. If you don't have anyone using mobile devices, then you're probably not going to put a lot of work into mobile device control policies. You'll probably just lock it out so no one can try and sort of go in the back door with one. But if you do have a very mobile organization using mobile devices heavily, you're going to put a lot of work into that, and there's a lot of tools for that. So there's a lot there that's very specific. And just to recap around this section now, again, that really comes back to the shared responsibility model. So Microsoft do their thing at the cloud provider level, and then it's up to you to take advantage of those tools, or as I keep saying, get someone like us in who can give you some steer on that, so that you don't have to worry about some of the intricacies. You can understand how it's delivering against your business needs.